So I want to quickly introduce our panelists. Michelle Dauber is the Frederick I. Richman Professor of Law and Professor of Sociology at Stanford. Krista Quarles is Chief Executive Officer of OpenTable. Ninian Wang is Head of Engineering for Social at Niantic, just recently sold her company Evertune to the company. And last but not least, Amy Ziering is the filmmaker of Hunting Ground and the Invisible War. You may remember her from the introductions. Both her and Michelle got a rousing round of applause. Thank you guys for being here. So we're all, I'm sure, equally outraged and appalled by the daily headlines of yet another director or investor or executive or politician who has abused their power and victimized those around them. I want to start, though, with a slightly different sector that we haven't been talking about as much, which is college, because this culture starts early. And so we're going to start by showing a trailer from Amy's movie, The Hunting Ground. So let's show the trailer, please.
I got a call from the Dean of Admissions asking if you were to get into Harvard, would you accept? And I said yes, because I knew my mom would kill me if I said anything else.
The first few weeks, I made some of my best friends, but two of us were
students. Went from sexual assault victims to survivors and now activists.
My name is Carolyn Luby.
My name is Alexa Schwartz.
My name is Ari Mostov.
This is a national problem.
They are fed up!
I was getting threatened. It was working in their favor to silence me, and I was terrified.
I thought if I told them, they would take action, but the only action they took was against me.
We've got a lot further to go.
Okay, so this movie came out in 2015. How many of you think that the process for reporting assaults on college campuses has gotten better? How many of you think it's gotten worse? Amy, what's the verdict?
Well, I'll defer to Michelle on that because she's actually teaching on a campus now. I'm a filmmaker, but I will say, I wanted to just comment on your opening comment about how we're looking at the headlines every day and horrified. Actually, I'm exhilarated. I never honestly thought that in my lifetime I would see headlines naming perpetrators and with people believing survivors. In fact, when I made Hunting Ground and before that Invisible War, and when we released Hunting Ground at Sundance, I remember when our ask, people say, what's your social action campaign? And ours was pretty simple. It was believe survivors, and that was thought of as audacious. And that's just 2 years ago. So, I think we're at a really, really, really tremendously exciting and new time. It's a cultural revolution. And I implore everyone in the room to take part in that, and we'll talk about that later in every which way. But this is a moment we must seize it, and we must not turn back from it.
Michelle?
Oh, well, I think that's right. I think we're at an important inflection point in which victims of sexual violence and sexual harassment are protesting the culture of impunity, particularly for high-status perpetrators. And I think that another interesting thing that they're doing is they are essentially launching a social movement that is against the complete failure of our formal legal institutions to manage this situation appropriately. And so one way that's manifesting is people are taking to the internet. They are looking to create two things. One is to end this culture of impunity and to hold perpetrators accountable, and the other is to protect other women potentially from experiencing the same kinds of abuse and exploitation. The campaign that I mentioned earlier that I'm chairing to recall the judge in the Brock Turner case is an example actually of trying to utilize the process of democratic accountability. Remember, we do live in a democracy, even though maybe last last November, didn't feel like it, to utilize the processes of democratic accountability in order to hold an elected official. Judge Persky is an elected judge. California elects our Superior Court judges. Hold him accountable for enabling high-status perpetrators, and Brock Turner was not the only one.
And explain real quick the case, just summarize for us what happened.
Just to remind you, Brock Turner was a Division I recruited athlete at Stanford. He's a swimmer, and he sexually assaulted a young woman behind a dumpster at a fraternity party.
Who was completely unconscious.
She was completely unconscious and didn't wake up for hours, actually, after the crime was completed. He was seen by eyewitnesses. He was arrested at the scene. He was convicted by a jury, beyond a reasonable doubt, of 3 serious felony sex crimes. And Judge Persky sentenced him to probation and gave him a very short sentence in the county jail rather than the 2-year minimum sentence in the state prison that he should have received. And this really, I think, touched off part of what we're seeing right now. Of course, Amy and Kirby's work has been going on for a decade on this subject, but I think this, the letter by the young woman, Emily Doe, went viral on BuzzFeed, the victim of Brock Turner, and I think it has pushed a lot of people forward to seek accountability, again, in ways that, that are non-traditional. Because our formal legal institutions are not providing accountability the way that they should.
So, and I think social media, I mean, we just heard from Whitney about some of the abuse that goes on there, and we all are familiar with it, but it is such a double-edged sword, right? How can we harness it in a productive way? Obviously, the hashtag #MeToo movement is making huge waves, right? But Ninian, I mean, you went online too, and can you quickly share your story and just give your opinion on how we should all be utilizing social media productively?
Okay, so as context, I was one of the first people to go on the record this summer, about 5 months ago, to expose harassment by a venture capitalist. And I convinced 2 other women to go on the record with me. Back then, it was very hard to get people to go on the record. We were very nervous about it, but by doing the article and then doing a lot of behind the scenes of contacting limited partners of the venture capital fund, within a week we got the resignation of our harasser, as well as the fund of $175 million was canceled, which is the 3rd fund to be canceled in the history of Silicon Valley of 30 years. And the other enablers and partners of that fund also submitted their resignations. So I think that with social media, we have the power to quickly, democratically state what we would like to happen, and we can actually call for action. So if we think that someone is a predator and is continually harassing or sexually assaulting people, we can actually speak up and demand change. And we've seen that in a matter of days, shows can be canceled, people can lose their jobs, and the average sexual predator or harasser has between 6 to 8 victims by the time that they are found. So by removing them from positions of power, we are saving future women. I also would like to say, since it's a room of leaders, please make sure that in your companies you do not use NDAs to cover up harassment. Non-disclosure agreements were made to protect trade secrets and are now being used to silence women. So as you make huge impact at your own companies, please don't use NDAs to silence women.
Krista, you've taken a very strong position in your own company on reaching gender parity, 50-50 across your organization, and have come up with certain other things that you want to implement towards that goal. And towards having an inclusive environment. One of those things is you have a zero tolerance policy for harassment, right? This is kind of, I'm playing devil's advocate here, but I want to ask you and everybody else, is zero tolerance the right way? Because there are skeptics who think that could actually lead some victims and some survivors to not come forward because there is zero tolerance. for the perpetrator?
I think it really starts with culture and what kind of culture you want to create in the companies that you have. And I have said that this is not a woman's issue or a leadership or a man's issue, it's a leadership issue. I mean, if you are in a position of power, you are in a position to make change. And so I recounted, at a Fortune conference this summer, some of the stories of my past. And I think as a woman, sometimes you feel like you got to play the game that's on the field. Like, do what you need to do in terms of just, like I didn't take aggressions to HR. I didn't say these things. It did not feel like a very hospitable environment for me to go do so. But now I'm in a leadership position. And I feel like I have a tremendous, not just opportunity, but it's a duty to change the rules of the game. Because if you're in a company where we talk about it openly, I talked about my pregnancies, my harassment, it's a conversation inside the company. And we want the whole organization to feel like, yeah, this is something that we can talk about. I'd also say that the ambition for our company to get to 50-50 women, we're about 42%, is that when you get to half, a lot of this stuff just falls away. And you don't need all this, back and forth or this support. When you're at 50-50, my executive team is about 50-50, and it's just, the gender issues sort of get stripped away. But we need to push to get there. The Lean In McKinsey study showed it's very super depressing that, every step along the way, women lose ground. And so as a company and as a leader, you're duty bound to make a difference and change the rules of the game.
Can I jump in on that and just say, when I started making The Invisible War, that was like in 2007. I remember
this is about abuse in the military.
This was about rape in the military. And this was before that was, no one knew about it. We actually, broke the story. And I remember calling and doing intakes, what I called intakes with survivors of assault. And what was so interesting was I would say, tell me about your experience in the military. And they'd say, I had a fabulous time at Camp Lejeune, and I was amazing at Pendleton, but, when I got to, fill in the blank, it was awful. And I said, well, how's that possible? Like, what was so great? Like, and why was it awful there? And they said, my commander. They said the commander made all the difference. If I was in a unit where the commander had zero tolerance for sexual harassment, there was not a problem. I mean, it's such a hierarchical organization, and it's so tops down that, everything was completely shut down, and there was no. But, in a different environment with a different type of commander who gave a different kind of message about the culture, the small percentage of men who are predators, and it is predominantly men, and it is just a small percentage who repeat these crimes over and over again, are treated with impunity, and that's where you see the problem. So it really is, I just also want to underline and highlight, you have tremendous power, and the people you're connected to who are leaders in your companies have tremendous power. This is a problem we can solve. Unlike most social ills, there's an answer to it. Punish perpetrators and don't have cultures that give them cover.
Yeah, I would just say that every predator had an institution that enabled that predation to continue. And so I think it is about looking at the institutions that surround these people and calling for leadership to break those things down.
Exactly.
Right. And at the sort of limit of that, of course, is our political process, because how you change a failed legal system and create cultures of accountability ultimately is through the democratic process. Women have got to participate in running. They have to participate in donating, and you can donate to our campaign. Women have to participate in the political realm, both as funders, and they have to say, this is what I expect from you, right? I expect you to support laws that are going to hold perpetrators of sexual assault accountable. I'm going to support Kirsten Gillibrand. I'm going to support other elected women who are going to pursue that agenda. There are some very good organizations out there like Women Count that are trying to bring women into the political process, because how you solve what is ultimately a problem of democratic accountability is you get in the game and you insist on that accountability.
And I love that, like, there's a lot of optimism here for how we can affect change. I think my big question, and by the way, I want to turn to you guys for a couple of quick questions in just a second here, but my big question is, there is such a systemic cultural, deep-rooted cultural issue here that has enabled this for decades, and I just want to read real quick, Michelle, you wrote this a little while ago, and just a quick quote from it. As a society, we have to acknowledge that successful sexual assault, successful that is from the perspective of the perpetrator, isn't a one-man job. It needs a crowd of excusers, enablers, and minimizers to ensure that the assault doesn't end badly for the perpetrator, even if the victim complains. We've clearly seen that in the case of Harvey Weinstein. How do we even begin to combat that cultural acceptance and the secrecy of it and the enablement of it? I mean, what are steps that we can all do?
I think that we need to look for tangible results. I like to count resignations of sexual predators. And this summer, we have resulted in 7 resignations of venture capitalists and CEOs.
You have a spreadsheet?
Probably.
I remember them. I think we should look at the amount of projects or firms that have been canceled or gone under for it. It shouldn't just be about something vague like an apology or 2 weeks in rehab. We need to look at tangible results that hit people's bottom line. When we have resignations and fund closures, then we will make progress.
Right. And I agree with that too, that's why the campaign that we're running is to remove this elected official from office, because we feel that when he loses his election, that's going to send a really, really powerful message. Nothing sends a message like that guy lost an election over enabling sexual violence.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, go ahead.
No, go ahead, sorry.
I was just going to say, I think that this bystander effect is something that's super real, but I also don't know that we've taught people how to say, this is what it is, and I don't want to excuse it. So I think it goes back to the conversation of saying, this is how you speak up. This is worth speaking up about. So when we're in a company, we want to make sure that everyone feels like, hey, this is something that I can have a conversation about and reach out. Because it takes, if bystanders came forward, we would not necessarily be in this position, and it wouldn't move to 8 or 9 or 10 victims. It would stop at 1.
And to your point, the Senate is just now introducing mandatory sexual harassment training. Really? So clearly we're not even at the basic steps. Amy?
And to go back to your question about social media and also the point about what can all of us do to change the culture, take a page from the Me Too movement, right? All of this happened because 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 thousands of women spoke up. They just said something. That's how our film started. No one was talking in Invisible War. When I would call these women and men in the military, they said, why are you calling me? No one's ever asked me my story, and no one would believe me if I told you. And I said, I believe you, and we're going to tell your story. So, and look where we are now. So it's this power of amplification. The other sidebar I'll say is this New York Times article, which you probably know about Obama's cabinet administration. Did you all read that? And how the women noticed that they'd say something and the room would be quiet and then move on, and then suddenly some guy would repeat what they said and they go, oh, that was an amazing idea. So the girls all got together and said, next time when Sally speaks up, one of us has to say, that's amazing what Sally said, and repeat it. Mm-hmm. And they found that it was amplification. And so, that's all also a very simple thing all of us can do. Someone says this in your company, you talk to them, you believe them, and you amplify their voice, and you stand by them. And we will move mountains if we do that.
And I think that's the power of storytelling. Like when you told your story, you realize, oh my God, I'm not alone. And then another woman tells her story, and then 12 women tell their story, and they tell that to 12 women. And pretty soon it's a political movement. That's why I'm so excited about this collective catharsis that's going on right now, because I feel like something's happening, and it's in the air. And I feel like we're in this point where we're saying, no more.
It is exciting, but we have to take that and turn it into defeating Roy Moore. It is exciting, but we have to take that. We live in a democracy, so the language of what happens here, how you hold people accountable, is you vote. So telling stories is important, social media is important. Ultimately, only 20% of women in Congress, only 20% of Congress is women. Only 20% of the political donations in this country are made by women. If you guys are the leaders, right, the most powerful women, you have to get in the game. You have to get off the sidelines, as Senator Gillibrand says.
Well, I really wanted to go to you guys for questions, and I'm so sorry, but we do need to wrap up in a few seconds. One last very quick thought. Any other tips, takeaways that women in the room today can go and do very quickly in 20 seconds or less?
If you're not ready to pound on the table, you can also create change just by frowning when someone makes a comment you don't like. We're not all ready to do Me Too to all of our friends. So if someone in your boardroom or at a meeting makes a comment or makes a joke, you can just say, And then that will already have some effect. And then over time, you can ramp up to speaking out and pounding the table.
Okay, I think frowning we can all handle. And thank you guys so much. I wish we had more time. We need to devote hours to this.